how did Mercedes and Ferrari fall foul of Formula One's plank rules? Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc's post-race disqualification at the US Grand Prix was the first time in years that cars have fallen foul of Formula One's plank rules. In fact, there have been remarkably few times in Formula One's history that planks have been found to have worn down too much, with the most famous still being Michael Schumacher's disqualification from the '94 Belgian Grand Prix. This makes it even more intriguing that in an area of the car that teams are very mindful of, there being no room for error, two of the top squads tripped up on the same race weekend. The explanations of how the rule breaches happened seem to be clear, which is why both teams had to simply accept their fate with the stewards. As Mercedes team boss Toto Wolff said, there's no wiggle room in the rules. We need to take it on the chin, do the learning, and come back stronger. The tolerance between success and failure over plank legality is tiny, given that there can be no more than 1 millimeter of wear between a freshly fitted plank and one that's gone through all the rigors of a race. To check compliance within the rules, the FIA is able to measure wear on the plank at 4 50mm diameter holes drilled into the surface at specific locations designated within the regulations. In the instance of Leclerc and Hamilton, it was the rearmost hole that failed their tests. This is an area that the FIA has been closely monitoring with the new generation of cars, and it has served several technical directives as a response to inconsistencies in their design already. One interesting discussion point after disqualifications was that the FIA did not check the planks of all the other cars on the grid. This is standard procedure though, as it would be impossible for the governing body to check compliance of every aspect of every car. It is why it selects random elements every time from random cars at the bid to check compliance throughout the grid. On this occasion, Max Verstappen's RB19, Charles Leclerc's FF23, and Lewis Hamilton's W14, alongside Lando Norris's MCL60, were all chosen to have their planks checked. The Red Bull and McLaren were given the all clear, whereas the Ferrari and Mercedes were not. The technical reason for why their planks were worn down too much is simple to explain. Their cars were running too low to the ground throughout the Grand Prix race weekend. The cause of this revolves around the choice of ride height, something that teams play around over each weekend. But it can also be influenced by fuel loads and even DRS use, as the aero load comes on and off the car. Teams normally have plenty of time in a Grand Prix weekend to get their ride height into a sweet spot where the plank is not in danger of being worn away, but the car is low enough to deliver maximum performance. However, this balance has proved harder to manage at sprint races, with teams just having one practice session to get their car dialed in for the entire race weekend. As a consequence of the more condensed timetable, there is an inability to cover the qualifying and long-run programs that are regularly done. Any ride height calculations made during this FP1 session must account for the additional competitive running that is added into the weekend schedule, as there are extra competitive sessions taking place once the cars are locked in. Furthermore, teams are not able to change the plank as freely as they normally are once the cars are in parc fermé, so there is a certain element of guesswork going on. We have already seen times this year, like with Alpine in Baku, where teams have realised after the sprint that the ride heights were too low, and that there was a risk of the plank being worn too much in the main race. Cars have then been pulled out of parc fermé to make the ride height changes and started from the pit lane. Ferrari revealed after the race that it had spent time during its FP1 racing the ride height of its cars, in order to find an optimum range for the race weekend, once it became clear how bumpy the track was. But it clearly did not raise the ride height enough. Intriguingly, it also suggested that the weather may have played a factor in how things played out. A stronger wind intensity that was originally forecast along with the change in direction perhaps meant that the car was being forced down further in areas of the track that it had in practice, pushing the plank on the ground. The situation though at Aston was also made more complicated by the bumpy nature of the circuit, which was described by Verstappen as not being up to Formula 1 standards. Another potential factor would also be related to the tyres, as it may not be a coincidence that two cars that fell foul of the plank issues were also those that ran extended opening stints. We know that as the tyres wear, there's less tread left, which not only reduces grip, but means that the temperature is also able to escape. This can result in lower pressures as tyres get towards the end of their life, and that has the consequence of a lower ride height. In both Hamilton and Leclerc's case, they ran longer first stints on the medium tyre in order to create a strategic offset to Verstappen and Norris, with Leclerc opting to make a one-stop strategy work against his rivals on two stoppers. This could have opened the door for an extra plank wear in this period of the race, when the car was still quite heavy on fuel. All these above elements came together to push the Mercedes and the Ferrari outside of the tolerated window. As Mercedes trackside engineer director Andrew Chauvelin explained, unfortunately, it is one of the pitfalls of the sprint format. where we have a solitary hour of running before Parc Ferme. Without running at a full race fuel load in FP1, combined with a circuit as bumpy as this in parts of the track where the drivers have to put the car during the bumpy Grand Prix, have contributed to the higher than expected wear levels. We will go away from this weekend and learn from this though. It will be very interesting to see if at bumpy sprint venues, with Interlagos coming up, teams will now change their programs in FP1 to ensure that they get at least one run on heavy fuel to better understand their ride height implications for the Grand Prix race weekend. Certainly very interesting to see what happened to Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton this Grand Prix race weekend. Certainly wasn't what we were expecting. It was quite late after the Grand Prix. I think I'd already gone to bed. And then they announced the fact that Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton were eliminated from the Grand Prix. Yeah, big shock, but the rules are rules, as Toto Wolff has gone on and said. And unfortunately, those two drivers were disqualified from the race.